Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, New York, Vinnie. He's in
That's
Seattle.
one way to stop the feedback.
Stop that damn feedback. The locale for the gentleman on the top or to the right, depending on how you're seeing your screen, the guy with the blue shirt, that's New York Vinnie. He's in Seattle.
Hi, I got my two friends here with me. We'll tell you about them later. And he's Michael Knight. He's down in Pasadena, California, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning. Unless you want to pay us for the other 2 days, we'd be happy to do it.
We will do Thursday. We will do Thursdays for a fee and Tuesdays for yet another fee.
Right, but if you add all those fees up, we're much more of a bargain than probably anybody else you could have on your radio station. But we are Mikey and Vinnie, Michael Knight, New York Vinnie. Friends for decades, satirists for even more time.
You know, satire is not often appreciated by the people who have a very stiff mental frame. They just don't see the satire in it. I was reminded about that with a famous satirist in the past. I'm going to turn this down for a sec. Named Jonathan Swift.
Yes.
Who wrote not only Gulliver's Travels, which was probably his most famous piece, but his most damning, cutting, satirical piece was one that was entitled A Modest Proposal, in which he decided to solve the problem of the Irish vis-a-vis the English. The English have had a problem with the Irish all these years, mainly because the Irish were alive. The English would have had a far better time, according to Jonathan Swift, if they had eaten the Irish babies as they came along one at a time and kept down the population. He described how they could be prepared and how delicious and nutritious they were, and how the Irish in the long run would be better off for not having to support the children, and the English would be far better off too, because it would be a distinct improvement to their diet. And under the heading A Modest Proposal, I've never forgotten how wonderful Jonathan Swift is. And that is why, Vinnie, satire does not work today on the Republican right, because they cannot appreciate the humor, the buffoonery, and the insanity that goes along with being a satirist. You have to take a far-reaching proposal and make it sound not ludicrous, but plausible.
But to be fair, Michael, it doesn't work on the left either. I mean, long before the right-wing people were so uptight about satire, there were a time when left-wing people were very, good Lord.
Well, Vinnie, name one Republican comedian.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, there's that.
Well, Bill Maher.
No. He's not a Republican. I saw him last night on television. Believe me, he is not a Republican.
Scott Baio.
I said comedian. I know.
Give me a few minutes. I'll get back.
I know how it feels, because I couldn't find one either. Anyway, so
but you know, it's funny because now we talk about cancel culture. We talk about this, and the Republicans are all upset about this and that. But
the Republicans invented cancel culture, and then they complain about it. Right. It's like they invent a disease and then they complain about the cure.
Well, for years, the left would make fun, and I'm talking about the moderate left, because I think when you really go over to the real left, it's tougher to find anybody with a sense of humor.
Well, if you go far enough left, you'll end up right.
And right, you go back over to the Lenny Bruces of the world.
Right.
But
I'd rather have Lenny Bruce than Kim Il-sung.
But there are so many on the left, and I'm talking about probably much more the moderate left, who would get offended when people when comedians or satirists would do what they do. How many people? I mean, the switchboards, the night they had remember the Saturday Night Live skit between Richard Pryor and was it Chevy Chase? John Belushi,
or as he was known in the piece, Honky Honky.
Right, Honky Honky. I think anybody that knows comedy is familiar with that piece. There was an outrageous amount of outrage about that they would say those words on television. And it mostly, people on the right didn't get bothered by it because they probably use those words all the time. But people on the left went ballistic because how could you say that? Because sometimes there's an uptightness that gets, and I don't even know if it's a left-right thing, it's just in people, that when you use the problem to satirize the problem, everybody gets upset about the original problem. But how can you satirize if you don't use the original problem you're satirizing?
I wonder very much if everybody got upset. You should ask the blacks who saw that for the first time in 1970, whatever it was. I bet they weren't upset. I bet they thought they saw the humor in it because Richard Pryor had used those words very convincingly and for years in his routines to describe the type of person that he was, to describe the type of individuals that he interacted with, and also to talk in the vernacular as blacks would talk to each other.
Right, exactly. But by saying left, I guess I should much more say white liberal. I think that would probably be much more of a descriptor of who would get upset in that situation.
Well, if we don't care what angry white guys think, why should we care what angry left-wingers think?
Well, I don't think we should care what anybody thinks, but here's the problem. If you're going to put yourself out there, we don't sit here when we come up with our show, when we sit here and we do the show, we don't sit here and go, boy, if I say that, man, there's some crap going to happen. Somebody's not going to like me. This car company's not going to send me a car. This person's not going to do this. This person's not going to do that. We don't do that.
Better not say anything.
So, what?
Better not say anything then.
Right. We just go with, then you become milquetoast. Then you become, two people who just want to make a living and don't offend and not offend anybody. But being as we're lucky enough not to be making a living at doing this,
we offend everyone.
We don't have to sit there and worry about it. We've been lucky, I think, in our careers that we haven't had too many people come in and tell us to lighten up or calm down when we've gotten into a couple of jams here and there.
We're nicer
than your mammy is the one that really comes to mind first.
Which turned out to be
nothing.
Turned out to be nothing. It was interesting. It was a line that we took from a beer commercial that had been produced in San Francisco by white guys, and it was supposed to be a mimicking of the name of a Chinese beer named Ching Ching, slap your mammy. And the use of the word mammy set off bells, and we had complaints from African Americans who were genuinely upset that we would use it in a comedic setting.
Let me ask you a question, seriously. And I know the African American that complained about it and got another African American's ear, and it wound up in the paper.
Well, these guys work for the paper,
right? And I don't think it ever came close to costing us careers, but it's certainly. And again, you have to remember the context of the time. Now, you probably would never say it because just you get bound.
Well, I think that we would have taken it to the step that. Remember, I wanted to call the production company in San Francisco, not to defend our use of it, but to explain what they meant when they wrote "Ching Ching Slap Your Mammy." Right. What were you guys doing when you wrote that line?
Well, I was in John
Driscoll. What?
No. God, boy, my mind is just toast today. John. I worked for the guy for like 5 years.
I wish he still made spots.
Yeah. Anyway, was a big. He had national spots all over the place. Matter of fact, I think that Ching Ching spot was a national spot, wasn't it?
Yes.
So no other radio stations were complaining about it, but because we got the heat from people who weren't even upset more that we used that, but were much more upset that there were no African-American hosts on KJR when we talked about basketball. At that time, probably primarily.
Well, that in itself is a fair criticism.
I never said the criticism wasn't fair. I think the criticism was fair. But, did anybody, here's the thing, did anybody ever look into why there were no African-American hosts? How many African Americans applied for the job that were qualified for the job?
How
How
many?
many had at least something that it was not a job? I don't know at that point. Now, things have changed. But at that point, I don't know if it was a job that never mind African Americans, that many people that had any kind of brains wanted. Except if you had this huge ego that needed to be fed.
Well, I think that the hiring practices of the parent company of KJR at that time, which is the Ackerley Company, would be the first place to look for a pattern of hiring. And if you wanted to know why you have a basketball team with no African-American hosts on its parent station, the flagship station, that'd be the first question I would ask, not the morning guys, but still,
Right. Yeah.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah. It was misdirected anger at us, but we were the voice, we were the community, in that community of people, we were the guys that they heard. So we were going to take the heat. It wasn't about that we were offending. It wasn't about that we were offending. Nobody called up the station and said they were offended, except for one guy, one newspaper columnist. Those are the people that said that they were offended. And then they tried to come up with a whole bunch of other things, and none of them would wash. I don't know what the hope was at that time. I don't know if the hope was that they would get us fired and the station would hire 2 African-American hosts to host the morning show. I don't know what it was. I know that there was a cry there for representation, and I agreed with it. I think eventually they did hire African-American hosts to be on the station. And that kind of leads us into our topic for today with truth, justice, in the American way, which is justice.
Well, justice is hard to come by because justice, like the law, is separate from reality. It's not the kind of justice you want or the kind of justice you feel you deserve. Or look at the parents right now in Florida who are going through this business of testifying against the shooter in the high school, and they want the death penalty, and they're not going to get it. They're going to get life imprisonment, and they feel misunderstood, misjudged, mistreated, and there's nothing we can do for them except point to the rule of law and say, this is what justice looks like. If you thought it was going to make you feel better, if you thought it was going to somehow restore the memory of your dead children, if you thought that it was going to take away some of your pain, it's not. It's only going to make it worse. And justice does not necessarily satisfy someone who is involved in the transaction and the awful events that took place that day. You're just the parent. You don't get special justice. How come? Because the jury said that he committed these crimes and he did it in a state of mind that can't be determined to say that without a shadow of a doubt, he deserves the death penalty. Right. There's a couple of questions in there about how he acted and how he performed that day. And there's no question about the horrible things he did. There's no question about the death that he caused. There's no question about any of that. But what does justice look like after everything's cooled off and the dust is settled? And justice does not always satisfy those closest to the event.
Yeah.
And how can
or even those far away from it?
How can you adjust it to make it satisfy everybody? Impossible.
It doesn't satisfy me. I'm 4,000 miles away from 3,500 miles away from the event.
And so you can't let the emotions of the families, despite how genuine they are,
right,
color and decide what sort of justice this perpetrator gets.
And at one time, and I think this is why in some ways this country is so enamored of guns, there was Old West justice. If you went out and you killed somebody, your brother or your whoever mounted a horse and went and found you and tried to kill you unless you had enough people to kill him first. And that was justice, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. when
or the famous line from Tombstone where Turkey, what's his name? Turkey Creek Jack gets part of his ear shot off in a bar fight where he just killed a guy in the street. Sheriff says, "Won't have to take your guns, boys." And Turkey Jack gives him over and says, "Sure, Sheriff, you know me, law and order all the way." That's the Wild West, law and order.
Yeah, I mean that was it. There was no real law and order in the Wild West. There was a law and disorder.
Turkey
There were
Creek.
certainly laws, and there were certainly people out there trying to enforce them, but they were fighting a losing battle.
Yeah.
Until, of course, Sheriff Bart came along in Blazing Saddles.
But we think of justice, and I'm going to change the subject here ever so slightly. We think of justice for the most part in terms of crime and law and order. And even sometimes we think of it in terms of corporate shenanigans where people get hired and people get fired and people get promoted in the wrong way. And crimes are committed in the white collar sense. And then there's poetic justice.
Right.
Now, poetic justice cannot be taught in a law school because it doesn't exist in a law school, but it comes around every once in a while and you never can say how. And I got so surprised by this event yesterday when I was looking at a website that I frequent on Facebook called YEP, Y-E-P, Rock, R-O-C, Records. They're a record company in North Carolina.
Yeah, is Nick Lowe on their label, I think?
Exactly who I'm going to mention next. Nick Lowe and his associate and protege, Elvis Costello,
right,
have released an album of a guy named Tommy McLean. And Tommy McLean is what they call a swamp pop singer. He's from the South. He's been singing since he had his first hit, which was called Sweet Dreams, in 1966. As you can tell, he's a tenor. So that's how he sounded with his first hit in 1966. The new record is out now. It's called I Ran Down Every Dream. And this is him playing with Augie Myers, who of the Sir Douglas Quintet. This is the new record. Swampy.
Somebody's laughing, somebody's crying, somebody's dancing while somebody's dying, somebody's losing somebody they're loving today.
So that's the new record.
It's got that Mendocino riff in it, doesn't it?
It's got Augie Meyer, the organ player and keyboardist for the Sir Douglas Quintet, making sure that it sounds just so. So there he was in 1966. Here he is now with a new record out. And I just wanted to say the poetic justice in this is that Tommy McLean is 82 years old. That voice you just heard is from an 82-year-older. There he is, walking up to the camera. He's a swamp popper from the way back. He's down there in the swamps all these years, playing the Indian casinos to feed himself.
Yeah.
And Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe come along and say, let's cut a record. Let's cut some hits. And they bring out all the boys. And he used to sing with a group called the Little Old Band of Gold, which was a group of New Orleans superstars that put together only two albums in their entire career, where they sang songs from the 50s that had inspired them to get into music, and songs from the New Orleans canon of sounds and beats and backbeats that made that sound so famous.
I get a high blood pressure when I'm with you.
That there you go. And Huey Piano Smith was a good example of that, especially well, just about every damn thing he ever recorded would be a good example of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So there's your poetic justice for the day. Tommy McLean releases a record today that sounds wonderful. His voice is clear and pure as it was in 1966, and the dude is 82. And what does he do for a living? He sings for his supper, and that is poetic justice.
Well, poetic justice is, I think, Michael, the most pure form of justice. How many times do we see in our lives? And you know, you and I are both into baseball, and sometimes, as a matter of fact, what probably teaches you more about poetic justice than anything else is baseball. Because when you go back and you look at some of the things that have happened over the years in baseball, the guy that struck out to end the season before and the team didn't go and win the pennant, next year, you know, hits 400 and leads the team to the pennant. Right. Or the pitcher who can't, you know, the Nolan Ryan, who can't get the ball over the plate when he's with the Mets, but gets traded, becomes, you know, one of the top 10 pitchers of all time. There's a justice there. That there's a and it's not just baseball, but that's where I think in many ways you get your early taste, if you're a kid in those days when we were growing up, of poetic justice. Then it becomes a little bit more squirrely after that. Then it becomes, well, you know, your mother taught your mother caught your father cheating on her, and the chandelier fell down and hit him in the ass.
That is quick. Just that's karma.
That's justice. That's karma. Because really, if you think about it, isn't justice a form of karma?
Yeah, but karma is subtle, and people don't like their justice to be subtle.
Right. People want people want the thing. See, justice is supposed to be the righting of a wrong.
Right.
But how can you ever right what happened to those people in Florida or at Sandy Hook or at any one of these, Uvalde, any one of these school shootings? How can you right the wrong of having your child taken away at the hand of another? Not just the school shootings. I mean, any kid that gets kidnapped, that gets stolen, that's assaulted. There's nothing that you can do ever.
That's why you get a voice, which you don't get to decide. The justice that is going to be dispensed has to come from a neutral judge, has to come from the books, has to come from precedent and law. It can't come from emotion. In fact, it's supposed to come from the opposite direction, whatever the opposite of emotion is. It comes from a neutral site. It comes from experience, and it comes from the law and the way it has evolved, but the way it's been applied over the decades. And you can't say, but I hurt more than that. I want more than that for my child.
Right. Well, does the person who has their child taken away from them in a shooting or a kidnapping deserve more justice than a mother from inner city Detroit who has her child jailed for 20 years for a crime that they didn't commit, or even worse, that they were set up for?
Well, there is a solution to that, and it's financial.
You
may have spent 20 years in prison, but you're going to be a very rich, free person soon.
But I can't imagine that, I shouldn't say that, because I always, one of the most popular questions that you're always not always asked, but asked, is if you could rob a bank for $1 million and be guaranteed that you'd do 5 years, would you do it? And a lot of people would say yes. For $1 million for 5 years, I'll never make that money, doing what I'm doing. I mean, now you could, but when we were kids or young people, but if you just you would get sentenced to 5 years ahead of time, would you do it? And many people said yes.
Well, they didn't think it through, but it's okay.
Well, I mean, if the feeling of, that's but you still don't get that. It's 5 years away from your family. That's 5 years away from your freedom. That's 5 years away from you, from
It's 5 years away from your $1
everything
million.
that we hold dear to us, right?
Yeah, including the $1 million. You can't get to that either.
Well, it depends on how well you hide it before you go.
Now, I wonder, can we collect interest on that while we're in prison? I don't
Probably
know.
not, unless you were smart enough to get it into an off. Only rich guys are able to do that.
There's
There's
a
an
certain
offshore account.
there's a certain fee for getting it to the Cayman Islands for you.
Yes, that's the Donald Trumps of the world. Where's
And
the justice for Donald Trump?
it's
What's the
lovely.
justice for what Donald Trump has done to this country and people like him?
The clock is running out on that, as a matter of fact. I'm not saying it will, but we're getting dangerously close to the end of the line for some of these cases. Here's another example of weird poetic justice, and this is not very pretty poetic justice, and it's frustrating, but it's true. Yesterday, after Dusty Baker and the Houston Astros got taken downtown by the Philadelphia Phillies, my God, the home runs were flying out of it. It was wonderful to see the Philadelphia fans go bananas, because if you were in that stadium last night and had 5 home runs in a World Series, you saw something that doesn't happen, that shouldn't happen, but did happen, and you got to sit there and watch it presented to you on a platter. But after the game, Dusty Baker was asked a question that didn't even occur to me during the game. How come, Dusty, you're an African-American, but there are no African-Americans playing in the World Series? And here's a sport, the most famous integrated sport of all time, that had to deal with its own feelings about Jackie Robinson as a man, as a player, and as a human, and didn't look very good under scrutiny. And it was later that when Willie Mays could play baseball for the San Francisco Giants and the New York Giants, we thought that we had come a long way, that we as a people, we as a country and as sports fans had accomplished something, had come to a new frontier where everybody could play. Well, now everybody can play, but how come the talented African-American athletes of America right now would rather play, or would rather play another sport?
Well, I think there's a lot of people want to read, and I've been aware of this for since the series was set. That matter of fact, I saw something on social media where somebody, matter of fact, it was a popular post, I don't know, a week ago when the series was set, about no African American players in the thing, and of course many people answered with, well, yeah, but you have an African American manager. Correct. So it's the problem. And the problem is something that we're not going to be able to solve, although I have tried to, in the past, talk to and be a part of the RBI program that baseball has, which is reviving baseball in the inner cities. If you go to a number of inner cities, I'll go with Harlem because it's the one I know particularly, there are programs that supply bats, balls, fields, gloves, uniforms for kids that can't afford them. Not just black kids, Spanish kids, black kids, white kids, all kinds of kids that live in an environment, and certainly there are probably more black kids and Spanish kids that live in that environment than white kids, but there's white kids that live there too, in places like Harlem and the South Bronx. They've taken some of those empty lots that you may remember from the Carter administration and turned them into baseball diamonds.
And what about the kids in Houston and Philadelphia? What are they?
Well, I think they have similar programs all over. What I think the problem is baseball at some point stopped being cool. It stopped being the sport. I don't know if it didn't translate because of a video game. I don't know if it didn't translate because it took so many people to to play. I don't know why it stopped translating in those communities, because I'm not a part of those communities. But you know what? It doesn't translate in white communities the same as it used to either. People will sit and watch it, but the kids go out and play it. Yeah, they play it on an organized level. My nephew plays organized baseball. He plays for his high school team. He plays on traveling teams. You don't see a lot of black kids playing, and they live in Sacramento, but you don't see it. And at that level, they take the best kids. And
Well,
I'm sure.
and look at the kids that have made it to the pros this year. If there's one thing that really stands out about the talent on the Houston and the Philadelphia team, is they've got pitching, they've got hitting, they've got skill positions, and they've got them in every corner of the diamond. These are very talented teams. There's no question that they deserve to be in the World Series.
And where are many of these people from?
Latin America.
And why is that?
That it's their sport.
Not
It's
just
their way-
their sport, it's their way to get out.
It's their way to get off the Dominican Republic. It's the way to get out of Venezuela.
Right. It's
In
the
fact,
way. It's the easiest way to make money.
You think that the Altuve story about him auditioning one afternoon in Venezuela and being signed that day and on his way to America, you think that story got around? Whatever
Yeah.
to Altuve? Altuve, oh, he's not here anymore. He's in Texas. What?
Right. And
Yeah,
you
they
had
signed him and took him.
and unfortunately, you had a guy down there in the 90s. I think it was the 90s and maybe the early 2000s, that was sexually abusing these kids that went to the academy. So all of a sudden it became, don't go to the academy.
Yeah. Was that the Dodger?
Yeah. Find your way around. Go to somewhere different.
Pick a different team.
Pick a different team. Don't go to that academy. And that probably stifles some of the kids. But in the case of Black Americans, again, it's hard for me to talk about this. I should actually get my friend George Foster on, who is the athletic director over at Rainier Beach High School, and talk to him about it, because he probably knows a lot more about this than we do. But it seems to me that there are several avenues now out of or that involve African Americans. At one time, Mikey, when we were kids, sports was probably the easiest way out of the ghetto for African Americans. If they could run, if they could, if they could throw a ball, catch a ball, run faster than other people. Not just African Americans, but run faster than anybody in their league.
It's just
They
now,
can get a paycheck and get out.
if you've got that level of talent, it probably means you can play basketball and football too.
Right. Now, basketball, the grind of getting to the major leagues, if you're a young kid with a shorter attention span probably today than most others, not just black kids or Spanish kids, white kids too, what's the quickest way to make a buck? Go to college, spend a year there, go to the NBA, go to the NFL. I think I'd be there a little bit longer from the NFL.
Well, if you want to remember, Bill Parcells' reason for drafting rookie quarterbacks out of college was that they had to have 3 years at their school minimum.
Right.
He wanted to know how many games they had played as a quarterback, under how many different situations, and how did they face duress? Right. How did they face adversity during those times? How did they react to the defense over the period of time? And you can't tell by the time you get a freshman out of college and take him to the pros, you're still dealing with a 19 or 20-year-old person.
Right.
You got a teenager with a professional body.
I guess the bottom line here for me is it's hard to me to find anything about justice in the fact that there's no African-American players in the World Series. Believe you me, I like to find stuff in anything I possibly can. And I think it's not a function of anybody saying you can't play. It's not a function of a conscious, unless there's something going on that we don't know about, which is always possible, a function of a baseball clubs saying we don't want to draft African-American players. I think they look for African-American players to draft. I think they especially look for talented, young Black kids that have potential to play in the American League, because there is that commitment not only by baseball, by people who have now not been in a baseball situation where you looked at one section of people and said they can't play.
Well, recent quarterbacks drafted. I can't remember the quarterback's name right now for the Arizona Cardinals. He came out of college and he's number one. He wears number one. Anyway, he was with the Oakland A's, went to spring training. I think they traded his rights to the Yankees, who never got to see him play either, but he went in uniform to spring training and took batting practice. Patrick Mahomes, I think, did the same. A number of talented football players.
Yeah, Elway did. Tebow, what was it?
Yeah, Tebow, right. From Florida, from University.
Tebow.
These guys had an opportunity to pick a team and to pick a sport. And in each case that we're talking about, they picked football because their position was quarterback. Highly sought after set of conditions. They said,
and you didn't have to wait 6 years to get a contract.
Do you want to be the shortstop, second baseman, or do you want to be the quarterback? And
Right.
the answer is you're not guaranteed either one. Which one are you going to try for? I'm going to take my shot with football because they want me to start right away.
Right. In football, if you're successful at the college level, you sign. They give you a big contract. I mean, look at the Seahawks. They got what, 4 rookies running around the field right now that are making decent money. They're not making the big bucks yet, but if they prove themselves, they'll make money. They're certainly good players, it appears, because the Seahawks are in first place. But there's another kind of justice. The justice that sports delivers for a guy named Geno Smith.
Right. Now, Geno's got an extraordinary gig. He's got a reputation that is a story that the NFL loves to tell, especially this year when there's so much upheaval in the quarterback ranks in terms of injuries and in terms of performance. Or ask Russell Wilson how he feels today. Well, he won in London. That's about all he can say. It's been a great year of transition, that's for certain.
It's been a horrible year for him.
And in a sport that traditionally said the black quarterback is something that we don't have because black quarterbacks don't exist for a reason.
Right. Well, that's the part of the country that listened to Rush Limbaugh.
Give me a defensive back anytime, but not a quarterback.
Right.
Well,
right. That's the stuff that you heard here at the University of Washington.
That's right.
When Warren Moon was the quarterback.
It's true. And everyone who said it believed it. Yeah.
People forget, well, now, I mean, Warren's done a lot to put himself in disfavor with so many people, but it has nothing to do with him being black and has everything to do with them acting the fool.
If you act the fool, you'll be seen as a fool.
Right. But again, the justice there was that Warren went on to be a Hall of Fame quarterback. While Pappy Husky, who used to call the show, say, these black quarterbacks, they don't have the tools. Well, what are the tools? Well, what are the tools?
What I mean?
Yeah. His justice was that he went to the Hall of Fame. His justice was that he came back to Seattle and led the Seahawks for a couple of years and led them. He was part of a piece of their coming back to respectability. And he had if he would have kept his nose clean, he would have had a very good career here on the radio and, doing analyst and could have, another guy like that succeeded was Kurt Warner.
Yes.
Kurt Warner was a guy, not a quarterback, of course, but a guy who after his playing days went into business was loved around here.
selling Chrysler Imperials in Bellevue
Yeah,
or whatever.
selling
whatever
Lincolns
reason.
and Chevys. Actually, it was a Chevy dealer.
There you go. Well,
And-
there is some justice in this story, and it's kind of weird because it turns around in a weird way. Jackie Robinson sacrificed so much to allow anybody to play baseball. And the fact was, he also sacrificed that much for anyone to play any sport. And so at the time that Jackie Robinson was taking hell on the bench for the Dodgers, the Boston Celtics was an all-white team.
Yeah.
Not anymore. Thank you, Jackie Robinson. The offensive line for the Seahawks. How many black guys on the offensive line right now for the Seahawks?
They all wear helmets, Michael, so it's a little hard for me to tell.
I'd say 80% of the line today.
Yeah,
Offensive defense.
most, if not all, yeah.
Can safely say that they're African Americans. Thank you, Jackie Robinson, for that job. And I didn't have to go through hell to take this job. All I had to do was play football. I didn't have to play football and go through hell.
I wouldn't agree with that, Michael, because I think any African American player went through hell to get that played in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, went through hell to get where they were. It might not have been the same hell that Jackie Robinson went through, but you talk to Jim Brown about how things were. You talk to Muhammad Ali about how things were. I'm just talking. I'm thinking of people that I've spoken to, and I think you may have spoken to as well. It's something that, again, it wasn't brought up all that much because the audience for sports radio really didn't want to hear it.
They wanted to think it and mutter it under their breath, but they
wanted to think that it was a perfect world, that nobody was prejudiced anymore because
Eisenhower was
black
president.
guys with money.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Spanish people. Now that they have money and they're wearing chains and stuff like that, people say, well, listen, they can be what they want to be. But if you were black in the South or you were black and traveling with a team, how many times in the 50s did you have to go and live in a different hotel?
Or sleep in the car.
Or sleep on the bus? So where's the justice for that?
Well, it's justice that's been delayed. That's the problem with that justice. It wasn't there when the Negro Leagues needed it. It wasn't there when the universities could keep the best athletes from playing at the university level. There was no justice for those players. There was no justice for them then, and there won't be any justice for them now. There won't be their time and their suffering was muted, and because we were happy with the Eisenhower years. We were happy with the Fort Edsel. We were happy with the life as the way it was, and it didn't affect us, or so we thought. That the best players didn't get to the professional level, or even the college level.
That I'm gonna look here. But there is a state, and I don't want to say what state it is until I Google it. But there is a state that next Tuesday will vote on their constitution, a new and wholly rewritten constitution. And you know why they've rewritten the Constitution? Because the Constitution of this southern state still contains Jim Crow laws.
The Constitution contains them.
Yes. The Constitution of this state still says that certain people of color do not have equal rights.
Well, let's see. If they're voting on it, it must be South Carolina.
No, it's. Now I'm trying to dig it up. Let me Google it because I don't want to say the state if it's wrong, but I certainly want to highlight it. But the point is that we still have people in this country that absolutely believe that
They live in 1861.
Yeah, they live in the days of yore. And maybe, I don't know how it's going to turn out. I don't know what the feeling is about it. But I think the hope is, obviously, with many people, that they repeal. I mean, many of these laws have been declared unconstitutional at a federal level.
But there they are in writings.
But there they are in writing in this state's constitution. And hopefully justice will be served on Tuesday.
And it'll be cold. It'll be
But again, is it really justice is it justice for the guy who gets out of jail after being wrongfully held, wrongfully accused? Is it justice for the millions of African Americans who were not allowed to stay at a place or buy gas? Or is there ever any justice for Emmett Till? Is there ever any justice for those people in Florida who are sitting in a courtroom today looking at this scumbag that killed their kids, not going to get burned because he's mentally ill? And is that really justice, though? Because did he know what he's doing? He's the only one that knows, right? For sure.
I think actually life in prison is an awful way to spend the rest of your life.
I think for some people it is. I don't know. I think there's people that actually go to prison, and maybe the number one example that comes to mind is David Berkowitz, the son of Sam killer.
Is he happy there?
He seems to be quite happy in prison. He says he's turned his life around. He's found God. He's a preacher in the prison.
Sometimes the devil chooses a man of peace, is all I want to say about that. Quoting Bob Dylan.
Yeah. Oh no. And quoting Denzel Washington, the devil will get you when you least expect it.
Get you when you're weak. Feeling good, feeling strong.
Get you when you least expect it, he told Will Smith that night on stage.
Will Smith, however, did not listen, nor did the devil. The devil said, well, he's right about that, but let's see if we can get this into context.
Let's see if we can create a national incident, because we all need a national incident.
Let me see.
Well, it took everybody's mind off of Trump for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Something came up the other day. I voted. Kristen and I voted. Took the ballot down to the city hall here in Pasadena, put it in a special drop box. No incidents, no fools sitting around with guns and cameras. Here in California, we 40 million people vote by mail and get it done. And Kristen has already received her text from the state of California notifying her that her ballot has been received and counted.
Good.
So that's if there are other states listening in right now and your voting procedure is more like Arizona than it is the one I just described, you deserve better. Your justice is that your vote should be counted as you cast it, not affected or colored or changed in any way by the strangeness in the land that day before the election.
Well, I have mine sitting next to me here. I haven't voted yet completely. I mean, I filled out most of my ballot, but there's 2 spots on the ballot that I don't know anything about.
What are they?
I don't know really what they stand for or who they are. And those are two local assembly people, because I'm new to this district. I don't exactly know what their stands are. So I'm sitting here, as a matter of fact, today, because I was gone for a couple of days. Today, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to look at this ballot and I'm going to Google these people and I'm going to try to find out what they're about. And if I can't find that much on them, I'm going to call their office and find out what they're about.
You should be able to find out online.
Yeah, I think. The one thing I know that puts both of them in my favor is that I haven't seen a political ad for either one of them.
That's good.
So that right there makes me feel good. That I haven't seen, and believe you me, we have been inundated with political ads on TV and on radio. They're all over the place. No wonder the broadcasters don't want a fairness doctrine. I don't know why political people don't buy ads with us.
The guy running for mayor, the two candidates for mayor of Los Angeles are Caruso and Bass. Bass is a female. She's African-American. Caruso is an ex-developer. And Mr. Caruso has just crossed the $45 million mark for money that he spent running to be the mayor of Los Angeles.
Well,
he could have just sent each one of us $1 million.
Yeah. I don't know how.
And been better off for the effort.
A few years ago, before I left, I had been approached before I left to go to Pittsburgh, I'd been approached by a couple of people asking me if I wanted to think about running for mayor of Seattle. That they thought I had enough name recognition in town. I was a former media guy. I had a real connection to the average Seattle person.
The worker vote.
Yeah. And they said, you would make a great candidate. And I was flattered that they would ask. So they said, well, we can do this for you. We can make this campaign happen. You have to go out and raise about $10 million. And the thing that clicked in my mind was always something my dad said to me when I was a young boy, when I was learning my first lesson about politics. It was, why the hell would anybody spend $100,000 to get a $20,000 a year job? Something's not right.
And yet everyone wants that job.
And so I said, thank you. I'm trying to remember who the current mayor was. Might have been McGann at the time, but he was going nowhere. I was active in the Democratic Party over the 34th district. And I just said, it's a great thought. I would love to do it, but it's too much money. It doesn't feel right for me.
Did they ever explain to you why you'd make a great candidate? It doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, because I was a man of the people. People, we watched you during the baseball thing, and you've been on track. We've seen you talk here. I've spoken at the Democratic Club. I was out doorbelling for people. I was doing all of that kind of stuff. And I think I had run for PCO, which is a precinct central officer, which is the representative to my election district from the Democratic Party. I had run for it and I had won. And there were a number of reasons. I talked it over with my wife at the time that it happened, and also at the time she was my wife. And there's two at the times going on there. And she wasn't too sure that she wanted to be, the first lady of Seattle. She saw some of the stuff that mayors had gone through, people coming to their house. This going to the mayor's house is not a new thing in Seattle. This has been going on here for years.
In fact, if you could go to the house, you can bring a hammer, or you can pick one up in the garage as you get there. There's hammers available if you don't have one.
Right. The whole thing. So I had spoken about it with her, and I finally got to the point where I said, I just don't think this is for me. And I've always used the adage that I did when I started doing talk, is that when I do sports talk, maybe 5% of the people don't like me, but may not agree with me. And even if they don't agree with me, they still like me. They just don't agree with me. And I'm okay with that. When I moved over to talking politics at Cairo after I left KJR, half the people didn't like me, would say hateful things to me because I didn't agree with their point of politics. It wasn't just that they didn't like that I thought that that was a ball instead of a strike, or that the Seahawks should have ran instead of passed. It was now, you're a dirty liberal asshole. You don't know what you're talking about.
But the Seahawks should have run instead of
But
pass.
the Seahawks should have run the ball. I'll never forget. I'll never forget that I was at the Super Bowl, and in 2005, and it was the night of the State of the Union address, and I was on the air after the State of the Union doing a general talk show from the Super Bowl, from Detroit. And they lined up as a guest for me, Tim Eyman.
The man who gets everything on the ballot.
Right, the man who gets everything on the ballot. And I despise this guy. One piece of me likes him because he knows how to play the system.
I have interviewed him.
But the majority of me, I have no use for this guy. And I talked to him, and I got into a pretty heated discussion with him. I didn't call him any names, but I came about as close to it as you could.
It's always good to call him my Mr. Iman, or my suitable friend, my honored
right.
opponent.
You go, oh, my good friend. Oh, what a great question. Let me tell you something. Anyway, and I just got tons and tons of chat room and there was no Twitter or Facebook at that point. It was just purely chat rooms and crap like that. And I just got all of this negative stuff. And I just said to myself, why do I want to put myself through this kind of thing? So I didn't run. I would run for a local council seat. I would run for something that I felt like I could help people with. But the reality is, number one, Seattle mayor is a no-win. Any mayorship is a no-win situation. The only thing you're getting out of it is your ego stroked. That's it. And you get to go to a couple of conferences a year. Other than that, you think what's his name in New York is happy that he took that job, that he got elected to that job?
He's got his hands full already. And the job that he took, mayor of New York, similar to the mayor of Los Angeles, is very different in the people that you govern, but it's similar in the way that you're really governing a city-state. If you're the mayor of Los Angeles, you've got 10 million people to deal with. And,
right.
And what are you going to do when 200,000 of them live on the sidewalk? First day
and you got to come up with answers to questions that the answers that nobody has.
That's right. We have the question. We've had the question, but we have no answer for that question.
Right.
And so if Einstein kept saying, I keep saying the answer is 3, but it's not 3. Don't you think he would change it after a while? Wouldn't he say, you know what? The answer is not 3. It's got to be another answer because 3 doesn't work. And we've all tried it. What is the answer to 200,000 people living on the street? And the answer is getting them off the street and putting them someplace where they can be safe and housed and healthy. Now that's the answer. And who's going to do that? Who's going to say, you know what? This hotel's been empty in LA. It won't hold them all, but it'll hold some. It'll hold a variety of people that are able to get into an elevator and into an institution like supervision. Then who's going to take care of that hotel? Who's going to clean that hotel? And it's all, now you have more questions than you started with, and you still have no answers.
Right. You have mentally ill people who, and I'm not saying it, who need to be analyzed and taken care of.
And make sure they stay on their meds.
You have people who are drug addicts and need help in that respect, and they have to go another place. It's not a one-size-fits-all answer.
Because one size will not fit all. And so
right,
that's
because
why
there are several problems going on. You can't look, it's almost wrong to look at people out on the street and say they're homeless. They are troubled. They have problems. problems have to be identified, and you have to be able to have the guts to say and get the courts to agree with you that this person is not in control of their own life.
So what we're saying is we're going to make a law that forms an element of justice that changes the way you live, because the way you are right now, you need medication, you need medical attention, you need to get off the drugs you're on and on the drugs that you're not on, and you have to have medical supervision, and you have to have social supervision. And now look at now this is day one for Mayor of LA.
Right.
How are you going to get the 200,000 people to agree?
You're forgetting one thing in there, Michael. You're forgetting a big component of it. Or we have to find a place where you can find affordable housing.
No, well, these people are not working.
Well, no, but that's what I'm saying. Is even there are some that do work. There are some that work and can't afford to get into an apartment. Try to get an apartment if you have bad credit in LA. Try to get an apartment if you don't have the 2 months security and first month's rent.
And the rents are high at an all-time high right now.
And you need basically 10 grand to get into an apartment in LA, even if your credit is stellar.
And that means you have to move yourself in your own U-Haul.
Right. So how many people who have divorced, victims of unemployment, have lost their jobs for whatever reason, how many of those people are out there in the street? That's another major component. How many of those people are living in cars?
And what
Are
we're
living
talking
in those
about,
campers that could light up on fire at any moment?
we can see that the actual people who need the treatment can be part of the recovery. They can be the managers, they can be the helpers,
Right.
They can be the facilitators, they can receive a salary for that, they can help to take care of themselves and their family and the ones that have suffered through similar fates on the streets of Los Angeles.
Sounds suspiciously like a dorm captain, doesn't it?
It sounds so easy. It sounds so right that there's got to be something wrong with my theory.
Well, see,
Einstein said 3 was not the answer, but I don't think we have found out what the answer is. And
Right.
we're going to have to play with this social experiment and do it seriously and turn it into an industry.
And we are going to need people who are willing to create laws that will pass the muster in courts and that will require the people that can't think correctly for themselves to go to a place and get treatment. If you are a drug addict, you're going to have to go to a place and get treatment if you want a better life. If you don't want a better life, you're going to wind up either in jail or not being able to stay here.
And there's no place to get your drugs where the alternative
Right.
is not an easier way to get your drugs. It's an impossible way to get them.
Right. And we cannot continue to have the downtowns of our cities loaded with people living there and crapping there and pissing there. It can't go on. I'm about as liberal as you get. But people that buy a house have a right not to have people crapping on their lawn. They have a right to that justice. People that rent a house. So don't mistake it for landowners. People that rent a house have an expectation that they should be able to come out of their house and not see people camped in front of it. That their kids can go to school without stepping on needles. See, if we want justice for African Americans and we want justice for Spanish people, we want justice for people that are incarcerated, we also have to make sure that we give justice to the regular people too.
Well, the argument that would be made in America is that regular people get justice.
Well, yeah,
and
there's certainly white privilege.
where the minorities have a much more difficult time in having justice delivered to them.
And that's where we have to, that's where the scale of justice comes in, isn't it? That the scale of justice has been this for so long. How do we get it?
Where's the scale of justice today in our truth, justice, and American way, America? Because right now, can the Supreme Court, the Supreme Justice, be counted on for fair and equitable decisions?
Well,
it seems that the answer to that is no, it cannot be counted upon.
Well, one of the things that you have to have in America for it to work is trust in the system. And I'm sure when we talk about the American way on Friday, we'll talk about that, because part of the American way is trust. If you tell me that you're going to send me a Gibson guitar and I send you $5,000, I have to trust that you're going to send me the guitar. If somebody say, I mean, the whole American system is built on rules, laws, and trust. And when you don't have that, when you have people that just plain out say, I don't trust the system, you have a problem, don't you?
Have you ever talked to someone who talks about their business as it's a handshake business?
Right.
Your word is absolute. And I can't.
My word is my bond.
I don't know what example I can have of this. I was going to mention the jewelry business, but the jewelry business is not always straightforward.
Frankie Valli and Bob Gaudio. Frankie Valli and Bob Gaudio have worked on a handshake since 1962.
And it was a damn good handshake.
Millions, billions of dollars have passed through these two gentlemen. And no contracts, a handshake. That's what they did in 1962, and that's how the relationship exists today.
Write me a song, guys. Write us a song, please.
Nothing but a handshake. They had contracts with the record companies. They had contracts with the musicians that backed them. They had but
between them,
Valli and Gaudio, they shook hands in 1962, and it still goes on today.
There's not an entertainment lawyer in America that would advise you to proceed that way. They would say, I know you're best friends. I know you're together. I know you're a creative team. I know you guys love each other from the neighborhood. But let me tell you, the pressures of this business will someday present you with a decision that will be impossible to make because you don't have paper between you.
Right.
If you don't believe me, wait, it will happen.
Ask anybody.
Ask anybody.
And ask the Fogarty brothers. Ask, people who grew up in the same room.
Yep.
In the same room. Ask them.
If it can happen to the young rascals, it can happen to you. And trust me, you have to have paper between you.
But yet, as of last night, there's no paper between Gaudio and Valli.
In fact, there's no paper between Knight and Richichi.
Right. Because we don't need paper. Who knows? There would be paper. Probably if we were doing this for $1 million, yeah, there would be paper of some kind.
That would be different. That would be, and we're willing to sign that paper, but not today.
Yeah, by the way, yes. And please quickly, I don't know how much time I have left on Earth.
Good point. No one knows. There's no justice when it comes to how long you have.
Exactly. But justice, to kind of close this thing out and look toward next week, or I should say Friday, because next week is going to be nuts. It's getting tougher to find justice, not just in America, in the world.
It's getting tougher to find the American way, because the question that we asked was, which way is the American way?
Well, that's going to be the big question for Friday. What is the American way?
You'll get a different answer depending on who you ask. If you were to ask Marjorie Taylor Greene, you'll get one answer. If you were to ask
Lauren Boebert, she'll tell you that it's with a statue of Jesus on every desk in Congress.
That is a big plus for statues of Jesus makers. But does it glow in the dark is what I want to know.
If you asked a woman whose son was shot and killed by a cop in a parking lot at a McDonald's 2 seconds after he was pulled over, well, you know what? That person will tell you justice is real different too. If you go down to Florida and ask any one of those parents that are sitting there that lost their kid what justice looks like, they'll tell you something different. And if you ask Paul Pelosi this morning what justice looks like, and Nancy Pelosi this morning what the American way is,
it looks like a hammer.
they'll tell you something different. The
Justice
American way is some nut job breaking into your house now. The American way has changed so much throughout the years. The only thing I know for sure is it's not the same American way as the announcer was saying at the beginning of Superman.
What
Which
year
is how
was
we
that?
got to this whole thing.
What
It's
year
not
was that?
truth, justice in the American way that gentleman was talking about, because the
I wonder when that
way
was
of Superman is dead.
When was that written? Truth, Justice, in the American Way.
1950, I believe.
Did that phrase appear in the comic books before they did
I
the TV?
think it did. Yes, I think it may have. So that would go back to 1938.
So the idea, the ideal of the American way was still very, of course, it was just a couple of years after the Great Depression. So that the idea of the American way had been tested mightily. And after doing one world war that we said we weren't going to fight and went into reluctantly, we were waiting in 1938 for a second world war to start, and it would.
Right.
And that would really give us the American way that produced the baby boomers, you and me, that followed in the optimism of post World War II life in America. That was the American way that we like to look back on. Everybody loves Dwight Eisenhower. Everybody's white.
Right.
Everybody drives a Chevy or a Ford. Everybody is happy with 3 channels at home. Everybody goes to school. Everybody goes out trick-or-treating and wears cute little costumes. Everybody's happy. Everybody is.
But the American way today is very different. The American way today is we don't just send bombers to Moscow to bomb the crap out of Putin because he kicks his ass. He's trying to kick a little country's ass.
Speaking of bombers, in the World Series game last night, after Bryce Harper hit his home run, he called the third baseman, whose last name is Bohm,
Bomb.
and they call him the Bomber. And he's yelling from the dugout after he scored, "Bomber, bomber, bomber." And the place is going crazy because he just hit a home run, so he can't hear him. Finally, he comes over, and Bryce Harper tells him something. And guess who hits a home run?
Bryce Harper.
Bomber.
Oh, Bomber. Yeah, that's right. That's the other way around.
The big third baseman. He's big.
Yeah, they saw something with that pitcher. They definitely saw.
Here's what you do when you get up there.
And you know what, Mikey? That's justice, isn't it, for the Astros?
It took a little while. It took a little while to come around, and it didn't look like justice for the Dodgers. See, the Dodgers are saying no justice. There was no justice there.
Swift justice is only guaranteed in the Constitution. It's not guaranteed in the rules of baseball.
No, that's not the way it works.
Sometimes justice takes a while.
On that note, because baseball is not like justice, go ahead.
Before we go, I just want to say one thing. I thought of you yesterday because I saw, and I don't know if you've ever seen this. Did you ever see the HBO documentary Come Inside My Mind about Robin Williams?
No.
You should.
Okay.
Yeah. A fascinating documentary. You know, his parents were automotive executives who moved to Marin County. I mean, I'm sure you probably encountered him at some point.
A couple times, but we weren't friends.
Yeah, but you know, maybe in a neighborhood. He went to Redwood, I believe.
Yeah, I went to Redwood. Gavin Newsom went to Redwood. Pete Carroll went to Redwood.
Yeah, Redwood High guys. There was, but it's just such an emotionally tugging documentary about a guy that I admired. I got a chance to meet him a couple of times, and I just I was sitting there in tears at the end of it. Of course, he committed suicide, probably with reason. because he had Parkinson's disease, although.
And he had some other problems too. And it just shows you now where's the justice in that? You have to go. Nobody gets out alive. So it's not justice, it's just inevitable.
Yeah, but his kids, I mean, he left just. Anyway, if you get a chance to see it, you get a chance to watch it. It's Come Inside My Mind with a documentary about Robin Williams. They talked to his first wife. They talked a lot with Pam Dauber.
Oh yeah,
who had kept in contact. They lost contact with him for 20 years, but then they were in a sitcom together toward the end of Robin's career about his relationship with Letterman and that time in LA. I mean, some of the pictures are fantastic of some of the people that so well that are so young in those pictures. And Shecky Green.
How can you have a documentary without Shecky Green? There'd be no justice in it.
You have to have his documentary with Shecky Green. All right, Michael. On that note, we will reconvene this thing at 10:10 on Friday morning, if the Lord's willing and the creek don't rise. Have yourselves a merry little Christmas. I just felt like I had to say that.
What about Thanksgiving? Can't we have a merry little Thanksgiving first?
You go in the store, you see a lot of stuff for Thanksgiving. No, Costco is full of Christmas stuff already.
I know the new history is Halloween, Christmas. What about Thanksgiving?
Well, we'll leave that for the supermarket. And that's going to be a whole nother thing too this year, because people aren't going to they're going to be tossing around dimes like manhole covers this year.
I bought a turkey breast. I couldn't help it. It was on the shelf and I wanted one. So bingo.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a smart move. If you're going to sit there and just have the thing sit in the refrigerator and you're not going to make turkey soup, may as well just buy a breast and sit down and have a.
Oh yeah, it's ready in an hour. Bingo.
Yeah. Sit there by the time it's ready by halftime.
And you get Trader Joe's microwave mashed potatoes and your own gravy, and you're on the right road.
It's better than eating at the home.
Yes, even though over here to the home,
even though, Lucky, they make the jelly cranberry sauce that you like, it's still better to come home with family.
What I don't like, Vinny, is having to make my phone calls from the hallway where everyone can hear me. But because I call the talk shows at night.
I know, I've heard that. All right, then. I will catch up with you Friday morning. Until then, peace, love, and Manischewitz, baby.
And Bob Gaudio, have a drink. Have a drink on me,
And
Bob.
Frankie, shake hands with Bob. Bob, meet Frankie.
You guys should know one another. Off we go.
Yeah. What's your girlfriend's name? Oh, Sherry. Sherry, baby.
Wait.
Oh,
There's something there. 2 R's.
let's go to the Brill building and see what we can do.
And it turned out all right. Thanks, Vinny. See you
All
Friday.
right, man. See you later. Bye-bye.